The galaxy was falling apart, piece by piece, world by world. Fire rained from the skies of once beautiful planets, and the stars themselves seemed to dim with sorrow. The cause of this destruction was the Varnock, a race not born from flesh and blood, but from something far more ancient and cruel. Their forms were smoke and shadow, shaped like monsters from forgotten nightmares. With claws sharper than steel and bodies that passed through walls like mist, they left no survivors. Entire civilizations vanished within days of contact. They did not speak. They did not reason. They simply consumed, and their hunger had no end. The Undari were the first to fall, gentle creatures of light and song who had never known war. Then the Therine, wise beings with minds that could shape reality, disappeared without a trace. Even the mighty Kordax, with their armored fleets and brutal strength, stood no chance. They tried. They fought. But the Varnock did not fight like any known enemy. They moved through shields. They ignored weapons. They were a force of nature, like a cosmic plague that could not be cured. In desperation, a small group of survivors gathered on a broken station orbiting a dying star. They had no weapons, no armies, and no hope. But they had one last tool: the Omega Beacon. An ancient device from the early days of space travel, it was designed for only one purpose: to call for help when all other options were gone. The beacon had not been used for centuries. Many believed it didn't even work anymore, but with nothing left to lose, they activated it. The signal raced across the galaxy like a scream in the void. It passed dead worlds, shattered moons, and empty cities. It slipped through wormholes and danced across ancient communication networks that had long gone silent. Most of the signal vanished into the dark, unheard, unanswered. But not all of it. Far, beyond the known systems, past the edge of any star map, floated a ship unlike any other. It drifted in the silence between galaxies, surrounded by the corpses of dead machines and broken satellites. This ship, black as midnight and pulsing with red veins of energy, was known only as the Widow Star. No one had seen it up close. No one dared. Its name lived in whispers, stories told in back-alley bars, in military bunkers, in places where secrets had weight. Those who knew of it spoke of a legend, a man, or what used to be a man. His name was Graven. No records existed of his birth. No home planet. No known allies. Just rumors. Some said he was a human soldier from a forgotten war who had seen too much. Others believed he had made a pact with something ancient, something cosmic and cruel. Some claimed he had died 100 times and returned each time colder, more powerful. All agreed on one thing: wherever he went, death followed. Inside the Widow Star, silence ruled. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. Graven sat motionless in the command chamber, eyes closed, mind drifting through the endless dark. His body, though still shaped, like a man, no longer felt human. His muscles had been replaced by woven carbon, his veins by lines of power. His skin glowed faintly with runes written in a language older than stars. Then came the signal. It was faint, broken, desperate, but it reached him. His eyes opened. Red light flickered within them. A voice played across the chamber, cracked, and full of static. It was the voice of a woman, soft but trembling, filled with pain and fear. She pleaded not just for help, but for survival. Graven listened without moving. The voice ended. Silence returned. Then he stood. His armor shifted around him, rising from the floor like a living thing. Black plates snapped into place, wrapping around his limbs, his chest, his face. The air crackled. The ship stirred as if it, too, felt what was coming. Systems long dormant blinked to life. Engines whined. cannons hummed. The ship had been waiting. A small smile touched Graven's lips. Not kind, not cruel. Just knowing. "They're crying for help," he said, his voice like gravel. On metal. "I'll answer." No one cheered, no music played. There was no light, no glory, no audience to witness the moment. Only a deadly ship tearing through the void. Only a forgotten legend waking up once more. And in the distant reaches of space, the Varnock continued their feast, unaware that something, worse than them, had just begun to move. Something that didn't come to save. Something that came to end. The space between stars was a void, a dark and silent realm where time felt as if it slowed and distance stretched like an endless ocean. The Widow Star, a vessel of ancient, chilling power, drifted through that void like a specter, unseen and unchallenged. Its sleek black form was a shadow against the stars, silent and waiting. Inside, Graven sat motionless at the command console, staring out into the infinite dark, his mind not with the stars, but with the pulse of the distress signal that had called him here. He knew what awaited him. The Varnock were relentless, and he had seen them destroy countless worlds, but none of that mattered to him. It wasn't just the Andari that had called. It was the simple fact that someone had dared to reach out into the dark, and Graven would answer. The ship's systems hummed around him, shifting, growing alive under his command. Every part of the Widow Star responded to his presence, the ship adapting, becoming an extension of his will. His body remained still, but his mind began to channel all the ancient knowledge embedded deep in his bones. As a human, he had been weak, fragile, but the years, decades, perhaps centuries of changes had made him something else. No longer fully human, no longer simply a soldier, Graven had become a force unto himself. Every movement he made, every thought he had, carried the weight of forgotten horrors and the cold logic of inevitability. In the dim chamber, the ship's red lights flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Slowly, Graven's fingers traced along the console, and with a single command, the Widow Star surged to life. The hum of its ancient engines rose in pitch, a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the very core of the ship. Graven's ship had been abandoned by most, feared by many, but in its cold hull lay the power to destroy entire fleets. He had never needed much. The Widow Star could tear through enemy lines, obliterate entire armadas with a thought, but it didn't need to. Graven preferred a more personal touch. His mind was his greatest weapon, and he wielded it with precision. As the ship jumped through the dark corridors of space, time stretched, bending to its will. A mere flicker of light, and the ship emerged from the warp, slipping past the edge of a nearby star system. Graven's gaze hardened as the sensors on his ship lit up. The Andari homeworld loomed ahead, its atmosphere painted with streaks of destruction. The Varnock had already arrived. Graven could see their ships, enormous and terrifying, circling the planet like vultures around a carcass. Their forms were massive and shapeless, dark clouds that barely registered against the backdrop of stars. Within the storm of Varnock ships, the few remaining Andari defenders were no more than specks of resistance, futilely attempting to ward off their attackers. But it was clear. The Andari were already lost. The Varnock were not interested in a battle. They were interested in annihilation. But Graven didn't care about the odds. He never had. His ship was more than a machine. It was a weapon forged from the bones of dead stars, and its very presence was a threat to everything in its path. With a single command, Graven activated the landing protocols. The Widow Star descended, a shadow passing through the atmosphere, tearing through the air like a blade cutting through flesh. The Varnock did not notice the ship's descent. They did not notice anything until Graven's feet hit the surface of the planet. The ground trembled beneath him as Graven stepped forward. His armor shifted, its black reflective surface humming with power. His eyes flared with a cold inner fire, glowing red in the twilight of the dying planet. The air around him crackled with energy, and the earth beneath his boots groaned under the pressure of his arrival. The Varnock, so accustomed to victory, did not expect this. Their creatures, massive and terrifying, hissed and snarled, their black smoke swirling like dark mists. They were fast, deadly, and savage, but they had never faced Graven. The first of the Varnock charged, its claws outstretched, its body flowing like liquid smoke. Graven didn't move. He didn't need to. His mind bent the very air around him, and in an instant, the Varnock's form shattered as if it had been made of glass. It fell in a cloud of vapor and ash, disintegrating before it even touched the ground. The others watched in stunned silence, momentarily pausing in their hunt. Then, as if reacting to an unseen signal, they all attacked at once. But Graven didn't flinch. He never did. His movements were fluid, controlled, deadly. His body blurred as he weaved through the oncoming attack, his every strike a calculated destruction. His hand moved like lightning, and with each flick of his wrist, another. Varnock was torn apart, dismembered, or shattered into a cloud of smoke. The creatures couldn't even comprehend what was happening. They were being torn apart by an enemy they couldn't even see. Graven moved with purpose. His every step brought death. His every breath was a whisper of destruction. The ground around him was littered with the bodies of the Varnock, their black forms broken, their smoke dissipating into the air. It was a slaughter, a one-sided massacre, and yet there was no blood, no screams, only silence. Graven did not care for the violence. He did not feel the thrill of battle. He simply moved, as if it were an inevitable part of existence. The Andari watched in awe, frozen in place. They had known that someone had answered their cry for help, but they had never expected this. The man, or whatever he was not a savior. He was a force of nature, an unstoppable machine of death, and he moved through the Varnock like a blade through air. It was over before they could even begin to process what had happened. As the last of the Varnock creatures fell, Graven stood amidst the chaos. His armor was unmarred. His movements had not slowed. He took a moment to survey the battlefield, his red eyes glowing softly in the dim light. The Andari approached him cautiously, their faces filled with awe and fear. One of them, a woman, stepped forward. She had no weapon. She had no answers. She only had a question. Who are you? Graven's gaze met hers. There was no warmth in his eyes, no compassion, only the cold, distant knowledge that he had answered the call, and fulfilled it. His voice, when it came, was a low, gravelly whisper. "No one important," he said, his words hanging in the air like the end of a sentence. "Just the one who answered." And then, without another word, Graven turned and walked toward the Widow Star. The Andari watched him leave, their world saved, but their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they owed their lives to someone who was not a hero, but a force they would never fully understand. As Graven disappeared into the sky, the survivors knew one thing for certain. This man, this weapon, was not someone to be admired. He was someone to fear. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling silence. The Varnock had been driven away, their forces shattered beyond recognition. But the victory came at a heavy cost. The Andari people, once a thriving civilization of peace and light, now stood as fractured remnants of what they had been. The planet's surface was scarred, cities reduced to rubble, and the once beautiful skies now darkened by the fallout of war. Despite their survival, the Andari were left to wonder about the true cost of salvation. Graven's intervention had saved them, but the price of that salvation was still unknown. Graven did not stay long after the battle. He moved like a shadow, his presence both a blessing and a curse. The survivors were too afraid to approach him, too afraid to ask for explanations. He had not spoken of who or what he was, nor did he offer any comfort to the grieving or the lost. He had come, answered their call, and left without a word. His ship, the Widow Star, rose into the sky like a black sun, disappearing into the depths of space as quickly as it had arrived. In the aftermath, the Andari gathered what was left of their people. The High Council met in the ruins of their capital, struggling to find a path forward. They had been spared, but they were not the same. The Varnak's attack had shattered their spirit, and the strange figure who had ended their nightmare left, them with more questions than answers. The Andari were not a warlike people. They had never fought for survival before. Peace had always been their way, and yet they had been forced into a conflict that nearly wiped them from existence. They needed to rebuild, but they also needed to understand what had happened. Who had come to their aid, and why? The council summoned one of their brightest minds, an Andari scholar named Kessir. Kessir was known for his knowledge of the ancient, the forgotten, and the dangerous. He had spent his life studying the histories of the galaxy, and in the dusty, long-forgotten texts, he had uncovered whispers of a being, a legend, that matched the description of the one who had saved them. But no one had truly believed it. It was a myth, something spoken of only in hushed tones, a story passed down by those who had survived the worst of the galaxy's wars. Kessir paced the council hall, his mind racing. The details were scattered, fragmentary at best, but the one thing he was sure of was this. The being who had come was not just a human. He was something much more dangerous. Graven was a creature of vengeance, a figure who walked the line between life and death, a man who had transcended both. His name was spoken in fear, in shadows, and no one who encountered him came away unchanged. The stories told of battles he had fought and wars he had ended, not through negotiation, not through diplomacy, but through sheer force of will and power. The council listened in silence as Kessir recounted the myth. His words felt like a curse hanging in the air. Graven was not a savior. He was a weapon, a being forged in the fires of conflict and destruction, a tool of death that had long since ceased to be human. He had been created for war, born of a time when peace was an illusion. And though he had come to the Andari's aid, Kessir could not shake the feeling that this act was not out of kindness. It was simply what Graven did. He was not a hero. He was the inevitable force that followed destruction. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They had known nothing of Graven before the battle, and now, with this revelation, they realized they had been saved by something beyond their understanding. The Varnak had been defeated, yes, but at what cost? Had the Andari traded one kind of nightmare for another? They had witnessed Graven's power firsthand. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The way he had moved, the speed and precision with which he had torn through the Varnak, it was as if he had no equal. His power had been terrifying, awe-inspiring, and terrifying all at once. And now, they were left with the haunting question: would Graven ever return? And if he did, would it be as an ally or as something much worse? As the days turned to weeks, the Andari tried to rebuild, but the scars of the war ran deep. The survivors had seen the darkness that lurked within the galaxy. They had tasted the bitterness of helplessness, and they had seen how quickly everything could be lost. The memories of the battle haunted them, especially the sight of Graven. The way he had moved through the battlefield, so effortlessly, so detached from the suffering around him. He had been like a god of war, an agent of destruction, and the question of whether such a being could be trusted lingered in the air. The Andari people, once known for their peaceful nature, now found themselves facing a new reality. The galaxy was a dangerous place, a place where even the strongest civilizations could fall in an instant. The Varnak were a threat, but so too was the knowledge that there were other forces out there, forces like Graven that could bring about destruction on a scale beyond comprehension. The Andari had survived, but they had been marked. They had seen what true power looked like, and it was not the kind of power they could control. In the quiet nights that followed the war, many Andari were haunted by dreams. Dreams of Graven, of the Widow Star, and of the storm of death that followed in their wake. Some dreamed of a future where the Varnock would return, and Graven would be there again, not as a savior, but as a force of nature to balance the scales. Others dreamed of a future where the darkness of the galaxy would swallow them whole, and there would be no one left to save them, not even the one who had come when they had cried for help. The price of power was heavy. The Andari had learned that lesson the hard way. They had survived, but at what cost? Their people had been spared, but their souls had been scarred. Graven's answer to their cry for help had come with a price they could never truly understand, and one that might one day come due. The months that followed the battle against the Varnock were filled with a strange sense of unease for the Andari people. The war had ended, the planet had been saved, and yet, peace seemed more like an illusion than a reality. The scars left by the conflict were not only physical but emotional, lingering in the hearts and minds of every Andari survivor. The once thriving civilization was now broken, struggling to rebuild from the ashes. Their homes had been destroyed, their families torn apart, and their way of life had been irrevocably altered. But above all, it was the presence of Graven that haunted them, the being who had come when they had cried for help, and left just as mysteriously. The very knowledge that someone or something so powerful existed in the galaxy brought with it a terrifying weight. The people of Andar had not forgotten Graven. He had vanished as suddenly as he had appeared, but his shadow loomed large over them. No one spoke of him openly, but his name was whispered in the darkest corners of the city. The more the Andari thought about him, the more they began to question the true nature of his intervention. Had he truly been a savior, or had they simply been swept along in a game of fate, caught in the wake of a being far beyond their understanding? As much as they had been relieved when the Varnock had been defeated, they could not deny the fear that Graven had instilled in them. He was not like any savior they had imagined. He was a force, unstoppable, cold, and unpredictable. He had shown no mercy during the battle, and that was something they could not forget. Kessir, the scholar who had uncovered the myth of Graven, found himself increasingly obsessed with the mysterious figure. After weeks of searching through ancient texts, he came across something that sent a chill down his spine. He discovered a hidden record, a legend of a being who was neither fully mortal nor fully god, one who had existed for centuries, if not longer, and whose very existence had been tied to the destruction of entire civilizations. Graven was not a hero, Kessir realized. He was an ancient weapon, forged in a time long forgotten, a creature whose mission was to maintain balance by whatever means necessary. In the galaxy's darkest corners, the name Graven was spoken only in hushed tones. He was a harbinger of doom for some, a necessary force for others. But for the Andari, he was a terrifying reminder of how fragile their existence truly was. Kessir shared his findings with the Council, and the weight of the discovery fell heavily upon their shoulders. The truth was undeniable. Graven had not simply come to help. He had come because the galaxy had demanded his intervention. The Varnock were a threat, yes, but the Andari had not been the only ones to face danger. There were countless others, civilizations and species across the galaxy, that had been caught in the same web of violence and destruction. Graven had not acted out of compassion. He had acted because the universe, in its twisted sense of balance, had called him into action. In a strange way, the Andari had become part of a larger cosmic equation, a puzzle that Graven was destined to solve, no matter the cost. The Council now found themselves at a crossroads. They could no longer live in the illusion of peace they had once held. The war had proven that even the most peaceful civilizations were vulnerable. They needed to prepare, to rebuild their defenses and strengthen their resolve. But more than that, they needed to understand the true nature of Graven's existence. The question now was not if he would return, but when. And when he did, would they be ready? Or would they find themselves at the mercy of a being whose motives they could never comprehend? For weeks, the Andari worked tirelessly to rebuild their cities, their technology, and their military forces. They knew that their survival depended on more than just rebuilding their homes. They needed to ensure that they would be able to defend themselves against any future threats, whether they came in the form of the Varnok, another alien race, or something else entirely. But as much as they tried to prepare, a sense of dread lingered. They could not shake the feeling that Graven's shadow still hung over them, watching, waiting for the moment when the universe would call upon him again. It was during one of the Andari's most desperate moments that Graven's name was spoken aloud for the first time in months. A distress signal had come from a neighboring system. The Draal, a once powerful race of merchants and explorers, had been attacked by an unknown force. The message was brief, desperate, and full of fear. The Draal were asking for help. The council convened once again, unsure of how to proceed. The Varnok had been defeated, but there were still threats in the galaxy, and they knew they could not face them alone. As the discussion grew more heated, Kesser stood up, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "We cannot face this alone," he said. "We may not be able to survive another attack without the help of someone, something, more powerful than us." His eyes fell on the council members, and his words hung in the air like a heavy fog. "Graven may be the answer we are seeking, but we must be prepared for what that means." The room fell silent. The idea of calling upon Graven again was terrifying, but the alternative, doing nothing, was even more so. They had no choice but to act. With great trepidation, the council agreed to send a message, a signal of their own, to Graven. They knew he could hear them. They knew he could come if he chose. And so they sent the message, hoping that he would answer. What came next was something they could never have anticipated. Graven's ship, the Widow Star, appeared in the sky like a dark omen, casting a long shadow over the Andari world. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no sound, no announcement of his arrival, just the cold, implacable presence of the ship hovering above. The council stood in awe and fear, knowing that they were now at the mercy of a force that neither they nor the universe could control. Graven had returned, and this time there would be no turning back.